Fire Emblem can be a daunting series to approach for the first time. It's not the easiest game to pick up and play, and there are so many entries across a variety of platforms that it's easy to get overwhelmed. So I decided to make a comprehensive guide on good games to start playing Fire Emblem for any kind of player. Whether you are a strategy veteran or a complete newcomer, this guide should help you make your choice on where to begin playing Fire Emblem. Now my three main recommendations are Fire Emblem Awakening for the 3DS, Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance, and Fire Emblem Path of Radiance for the GameCube. But of these options, the most common game people in the modern Fire Emblem fanbase started with is Fire Emblem Awakening. Fire Emblem Awakening is by far the most popular and readily available title in the series, and it was the game that got me into Fire Emblem. It's very accessible to newcomers, mainly because of the inclusion of casual mode. If you didn't know already, in most Fire Emblem games, when your characters die, they die for good, like the entire game. They don't come back when they die. This can be quite intimidating for a new player trying to learn the ropes. So Awakening gives the option to play in casual mode, where every character returns after every level, no matter if they died. Newcomers can take their time and get the gist of the game without a huge penalty hanging over their head. Another upside is that no previous story knowledge or lore is needed to enjoy the story of Awakening. The game does make a few references to previous titles, but it's nothing to be concerned about. You can jump right in without any worries. However, there are some downsides to starting with Awakening. As somebody who started with it myself, I can testify. First, casual mode can actually be detrimental if you want to play earlier games in the series. You cannot play older Fire Emblem games with casual mode strategies, so be aware of that. There's another feature in Awakening called Pair Up, and I won't give the full explanation here, but essentially two characters can occupy one space and get massive benefits. However, the only other Fire Emblem game than Awakening that has this feature is Fire Emblem Fates, so be aware that using strategies with Pair Up and strategies in casual mode simply don't work in older entries, and you may find the transition difficult if you head that route. In summary, begin with Awakening if you don't want to worry about permadeath, you want to play Fire Emblem Fates as soon as you can, and you want to learn about Chrom, Robin, and Lucina. Games I recommend after finishing Awakening are Sacred Stones because of similar world map features, and they share a lot of common in terms of difficulty, and it's a good transition game. And then Fire Emblem Fates, because Fates is the successor to Awakening, and if you enjoyed Awakening, you'll most likely enjoy Fates. However, I don't recommend Fates as a beginner game, and I'll explain that later in the games not to start on list at the end of the video. Although Awakening is a very solid choice for a first game, my personal recommendation for a new Fire Emblem player is to start with Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance. Just like Awakening, no prior story knowledge is required, and even though it's a prequel to the Japan-only game Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, you don't need to play that game to understand the plot in this Fire Emblem. The game is also readily available off the eShop, albeit on the Wii U. If you don't have a Wii U, an emulator is always an option, but you'll have to figure that out on your own. But the main reason I recommend it over Awakening is that it is designed for beginners while maintaining Fire Emblem staples you can carry into later entries. Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance was the first game in the series to be released outside of Japan, so the developers knew they were dealing with an audience that had never played Fire Emblem before. As such, there is a very in-depth tutorial right at the beginning of the game that will teach you all you need to know, step by step. Not only that, but everything you learn while playing Fire Emblem will be transferable to other games in the series. You don't have to worry about any major features like casual mode or pair up disappearing. From Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance, you can jump to any game in the series you like. It will familiarize you with the series while keeping future games you play less jarring. To summarize, start with Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance if you plan on playing the entire series. You want an in-depth, step-by-step tutorial to learn the game, or you want a handle on universal Fire Emblem gameplay conventions. After you finish Fire Emblem 7, just like Awakening, I recommend playing the Sacred Stones, as it is the easiest leap to make to after both Awakening and Fire Emblem 7. Or Path of Radiance, if you can afford it. It's a very pricey game, which we're going to be discussing right now. Both Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance are great starting points, but there is one other option that I mentioned earlier, Path of Radiance. Now, the biggest hurdle to playing Path of Radiance is the price tag. This game is rare and expensive, and some people just can't afford to play it. You can avoid this issue by using the Dolphin emulator, but once again, you are on your own if you want to go that route. But, if you want to start out your Fire Emblem experience with a bang, I highly recommend Path of Radiance. Just like Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance, this is a great learning ground to get a grasp on what Fire Emblem is all about. It features a very strong story and features fan favorite Smash Bros. Character, Ike. This is a more difficult choice for a beginner, but if you're up for the challenge, by all means, go for it. Veterans for myself may not find it that difficult anymore, but I believe it will be a sufficient enough challenge for a complete newcomer. In summary, start with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance if you have the money or are willing to emulate the game, you seek a challenge right off the bat, or you want to learn more about Ike and his story. As next games to play after Path of Radiance, I recommend Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, as it is the direct sequel to Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, which we will discuss in a moment, and Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance. Just like I recommend Path of Radiance after Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance, I recommend Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance after Path of Radiance, because playing these two games will give you a very solid, fundamental understanding of Fire Emblem, and the ability to play any game in the series you choose. Just like there are good starting points for Fire Emblem, there are bad starting points for Fire Emblem, and these are the games I don't think a newcomer should begin with. First off, this may come as a surprise, but I really don't recommend any Path of Fire Emblem Fates to a newcomer, even Birthright. I'll go more in depth in another video, but Birthright doesn't really do a very good job demonstrating the appeal of the series like the games previously mentioned. It's just not going to hook you into it. Many of my friends attempted to start playing Fire Emblem with Birthright, and very few finished. I know that's a very personal reason, but I had similar experiences with Awakening, and it was much more successful. If you want to play Fates, that's what I recommend you do. Begin with Awakening, and then make the transition to Fates. The second game I don't recommend to start with is Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, and there are two very simple reasons why. One, it's hard, like one of the hardest games in the series. Even on the easiest difficulty, a newcomer is going to run into a lot of problems making it even past the first section. Second, the story is a direct sequel to Path of Radiance. A newbie is going to have a lot of issues understanding the context of the story and will possibly misunderstand a lot of story elements. Simply put, I only recommend playing Radiant Dawn after you've played Path of Radiance. There you have it. I really hope this guide helped you decide where you want to start your experience in Fire Emblem. I really hope you do take the plunge. This is my favorite video game series, and I want to help as many people as possible play the game. In the comments, please tell me which game you plan on playing first, or what was your first game in the series. Thanks for watching. This is Zukon of Pavise Productions, signing off. See you next time.